Good to be with you this morning. I was with the guys on the men's retreat. The thing I've been saying is we laughed, we cried, we were courageous men. It was a fun time. And so those of you who were there, it's a good time together. Well, I still remember the day that I went to the car lot with my dad. I was going to get married in a couple of weeks, and I needed a new car. I was driving an older car. I was driving a 1987 Toyota Corolla stick shift. Anybody have one of those? Palmer, thank you. Yes. So mine, it had rusted out. And so we were now going to the car lot to see now it was 1997. And so what was out there. So I went to the lot, looked over all these cars, looked at all the options, and at the very, very end, I decided that I was going to lease a car. For 2 years, I was going to lease a 1997 Toyota Corolla, right? And I was like, I could not believe it. This car was incredible. I mean, it had leather seats. It had a fin on the back of it. I don't know what it was for, but it sure was cool. It had a CD player, it had a sunroof, it had all of these wonderful amenities, and even had that new car smell, right? And so I was driving off the lot with this car, and I was like, I cannot believe this is my car. But let's tell the truth here, it really wasn't my car. I was leasing it, and I signed lots of paperwork that basically said, let me remind you, you are not the owner of this car. Toyota Motor Company, they are the owner of the car. You are leasing the car. And so I had to document when I was going to get oil changes because the owner wanted me to, right? And the owner didn't want me to drive more than 1,000 miles a month. And the owner had lots of ideas of what this car should look like at the very end. And so whether it was something I scratched or dinged up, I was responsible for all of it. I was merely borrowing it. Today we're going to talk about a parable of the book of Mark about leasing and owning. Which one are you going to be? Someone who's going to lease or someone who's going to own? And it's going to be a story, a parable about us and the spiritual journey that every single one of us is on as owners or lessees. That's where we're going to be this morning. So last week we started in the last week of Jesus' life, chapter 11. It's interesting, the last 6 chapters document the last week of Christ's life. And the first 10 chapters were all about up until that point. And so now we are in the last week of his life. And so last week, Johnny started us off in chapter 11. We talked about this idea of busyness. We talked about the character, his agenda, what was Christ up to? And he challenged us in the midst of a fig tree to understand what does it mean to truly have significant fruit in our lives? And are we just busy? We look good, but do we have substance that is there? So that's where we were last week. And so from this point, Jesus is in the presence of the temple area once again, and the religious experts are closing in on him. They want to figure out what is going on. Now, mind you, he had just flipped over tables, right? He's flipping over tables, he's making a scene, and now people are drawn to this. And the religious experts want to know what is going on there. So the Sanhedrin, which was made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes, they're all taking note, and they're like, yes, we got to figure out what is this guy all about. And so they are now approaching him for a showdown. And essentially, in the last few verses of chapter 11, they basically come up to him and say, who do you think you are? Who gave you this authority? Who do you think you are? And so this prompts Jesus to now give a response. And many times he didn't just give an answer. There were times in the Gospels where he would respond with a parable, a story. Like they have these very direct questions, and now he has a parable he wants to give them. And so it prompts him to say these things in chapter 12, verse 1. If you have your Bible, you can follow along. If not, you can just follow along on the screen in front of you. He began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it. And he dug a pit for the winepress, and he even built a tower. and he leased it to tenants and went into another country. All right, so the setting of this parable is one that the immediate audience would have been very, very familiar with. This idea of tenant farming. Tenant farming. The picture is this: a man goes and he buys a land, and so then he takes the soil, and he plants a vineyard. He's taking care of. He's doing all the preparatory work for this vineyard. He even installs a fence. He doesn't want any kind of animal to come and to take any of the plants, wild boars, whatever it might be. So he builds a fence around. And not only that, he put in a wine press. A wine press, this idea of you would take the grapes that would come one day, and you would step on them, you would crush them, and then the wine, the grape juice would then flow into a different vat. He has put that contraption already in place. The wine press is there. And to top it all off, he puts in a tower where you can then go up and you can get a bird's eye view of what is happening in the vineyard. And so there have been lots of preparations that have been made to the vineyard. And so the last detail we hear about from the man, the owner, is this: he's leaving. He's leaving. He's out of there. He is now going to lease this. And he's leasing this to tenants, to caretakers, some who will take care of the garden. And they are now in charge of everything that's in the garden, the vineyard, the wine press, all of it, and the produce and the products that would come from that vineyard. And so they would then owe a certain percentage to the owner. Commonly, it was about 25%. 25%, a quarter of it, of the whatever came from the vineyard, you would give to the owner. The rest of it you would then use for yourself, sell, whatever you wanted to do. And so this is a beautiful garden. It's been created with this wonderful potential for great, great things to happen. Okay, so here's the continuation of the parable, verse 2. When the season came, he, meaning the owner, he sent a servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. And they, the tenants, they took him, and they beat him, and they sent him away empty-handed. Again, he sent to them another servant, and they struck him on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent another, and him they killed. And so with many others, some they beat and some they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. Finally, he sent him to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And so they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read the scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. So they left him and they went away. Not quite what you might be expecting from the parable of the tenants, right? So you hear this parable about this owner. He sets this wonderful vineyard up, and now he's sending servants back to collect when the time was right. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years had elapsed, and so now he is now coming back. The vineyard is now producing. He is now coming back to take what is rightfully his as the owner. So, what happens to the servants? This is very peculiar. The servants are now being mistreated. Actually, they're being harmed, and even some who are being killed. What? What's going on here? What's wrong with these tenants? And so the owner, he comes up with another idea. It's really kind of a preposterous idea when you think about it. He is now going to send his own son to the tenants, and you're thinking, wait a second, they're mistreating everybody. Why? They will respect. Notice the word. They will respect my son. He's sure of it. And so he sends the son, back to the vineyard to collect, right? And here what happens is even more tragic. We get a glimpse of the intentions of the tenants who are leasing the vineyard. The tenants saw an opportunity, a selfish opportunity to become the owner, right? Here is the heir. Here's the son of the owner. And so if we could just get rid of him, and then once the owner passes on, guess who's going to be the owner of the vineyard? Us. This is beautiful. And so let us decide to kill him. Made sense to them, right? And so in the parable, the son comes, the beloved son, and they thoughtlessly kill him, throw his body out of the vineyard, and they have rejected him. Again, the beloved son has been rejected, who happens to be, as the parable says, the cornerstone, another metaphor to talk about the building process, and the cornerstone being the important piece you would build off of. The cornerstone, this is how important this son is. He has been rejected. For what? The selfish hope that maybe if he were out of the way, the tenants could then become the owners. So we get down to verse 9, and the question is asked, what will the owner of the vineyard do? Well, there are consequences, right, for this. And there are severe consequences. The answer comes from the owner, who will come back, and he will take those tenants and he will destroy them. And he will give his vineyard to those who will use it. He'll give it to more people. But those tenants he cannot trust. And so the Sanhedrin has just heard this, right? The Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, they have now gotten closer. What authority gives you this? They now hear this parable, and at the very end, they sense something, right? We sense that he's talking about us. It sounds kind of familiar, some of these details. We perceive, right, that he is talking about us. The other day, I was talking to my wife, and we were talking about our kids, and we weren't using their names. We're just talking about them. And so they now were coming in out of the kitchen, and so we kept talking, and eventually my son Peyton was like, "Are you talking about us?" It's like he hadn't put two together, but he had sensed something, right? Yes, we're talking about you. We weren't using your names. We're talking about you. The same is happening here. Jesus is talking about the religious Sanhedrin. But as listeners in 2013, hopefully we also are sensing something about this parable, because he's talking to us as well. Hopefully your ears are itching as you hear the details about this vineyard and this story about a son and a beloved son and these tenants, and hopefully something resonates with you as well, because it's about you. You are part of this parable too. And so it really is a story he's telling, and it's one that includes us. It's a spiritual story. It's really the gospel story. It's about an owner. Let's see if this resonates with you. It's about an owner who graciously creates and provides a wonderful vineyard. A wonderful vineyard. Sound familiar? Yes, you're like, it kind of sounds like how the story began in the Garden of Eden, right? This wonderful garden. Now, well, the owner has set up this garden as such, and he trusted the original occupants, right? But something went wrong in the garden. We all know that. Sin came into the garden, and this idea of pride and selfishly pushing the owner away. And so the tenants have an issue all the way back into the original Adam and Eve. There was a problem there. And so as the story continues, the owner sends messengers to hear the message of the owner, one after the other. But constantly, the message is rejected. Until there comes a point where the owner says, you know what? I'm going to send my son. They will listen. They will respect. They will accept my son. I'm going to send my son. And so he sends his son, the patient owner. And he sends all of these messengers. And eventually he sends his own son into the vineyard. What will happen? I can't help but think of Isaiah chapter 53. Listen to these words. Another messenger, Isaiah, would say this: "Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." And we hear these kinds of passages, and we hear this parable about the tenants. And there's lots of correlation there with our own lives, because we too, part of our story is being a tenant who has rejected. It's in our blood. Right from the beginning, we are born as tenants who are about rejecting this kind of story. But there's good news, right? The good news is that the patient owner sends messages and messengers along the way over and over again. And the end of the story doesn't have to be rejection for those here this morning. The story can be one of acceptance, accepting the son. You see, the owner wants you to accept his son, to get over these issues of wanting to be the one who is the owner, right? Giving up power and prestige and pride and surrendering to the son, surrendering to him. See, the end of the story doesn't have to be rejection for you. It can be acceptance of the gospel. It's the truth that every single one of us in this room must come face to face with at some point in our lives. This truth that all of us have a problem that only the Son, the owner of the Son, can fix. Jesus Christ. And because of his blood and because of his broken body, because of what he did at the cross, there now can be a relationship. There now can be peace with the owner. And it's a black and white issue. You either accept the Son or you reject him. There's no in between. He is the way, right? The life, the truth. He is all of these things. No one comes to the Father. No one does business with the Father, the owner, unless they first do business with the Son. Where are you at this morning with that truth? That's the first question we ask. See, we talk about accepting and rejecting. We talk about thinking we are the owners. No, we're really just tenants. And there is one owner, and he has a son. Do you know him? I don't know where you're at with that truth this morning, but a lot here at Riverwood, we talk about the story. How did it all begin? Where did things go wrong? Is there any hope in this world? And today might be the day where you have spent your life rejecting that story. And I know there are some in this room who might not know this truth. But there is an owner who wants you to hear about his son and what he did for you. And if you want to know more about that, we have these little booklets called The Story. We keep them out on the kiosk. Grab one of them. Take it with you. Read about that. Read about the son. Because, again, the story doesn't have to end with rejection. The story can end with you accepting the son who has been sent. Because in the parable, we know the owner is coming back, and he will make all things right. He will make all things right. He will take all accounts and make them right based on the Son. Have you accepted him? Well, for those who have accepted the Son, it really begs the next question. In this parable, it begs the question about, okay, I've accepted him. Now what? Where do I go with that? How do I live my life? What are the expectations of being someone who is in the garden, in the vineyard? We see I think there's a truth here that really resonates with those who live this way of accepting the Son. And it really revolves around this idea of being a tenant, right? This idea of ownership versus leasing. And we are now to live our lives as ones who have accepted the Son and have surrendered to him, not as owners, but as tenants. The other day, I didn't drive the van far enough into the garage, and I put down the garage door and I hit the back of the bumper. It was close, but it didn't make it. Grinds the bumper. Anybody else do that? Am I the only one? Okay. Thank you for admitting that, right? And so I get back there and I look at the bumper and it's scratched and it has a gouge in it. And as the owner of the van, I'm really not that upset about that. There's bigger things out there. I'm not that worried about it. But then in that moment, I was hearkening back to 1998 when I was in a parking lot of Sam's Club with my leased 1997 Toyota Corolla. And so I was backing out, and I backed into one of those parking where you put the shopping carts. I had backed into one of those. And in that moment, I was like, oh, no. And so I go back, and I look at the bumper, and it's crinkled. It has some scratches on it. And I'm like, great. The owner's not going to be happy about this, right? The owner versus the one who is leasing. That's the same idea here. We are ones who are on lease. We live our lives as lessees of the owner. And if you have accepted the Son, that is where we go from this point forward. And so it goes into lots of different areas of our lives, of how to live our lives. Our time. Our time is not ours. Our time really is his. Think about that. And all the time that we have, when we talk about my time and the things that we need to do, really? You're on lease. It's really his time. And we could have this conversation about money. Well, it's my money, and I'm going to do this with it. And actually, it's his. You've surrendered to him. You're on lease. And your money is his money. What are you doing with his money? That's a better question. Or we could talk about our relationships. It's my relationships. Actually, your covenant you have with your wife, it ends. Till death do you part. When you die, that covenant ends. You are now in this time of lease with your spouse. Your kids are the same way. They are his. Everything is his. He is the owner of it all. At times, we get that really confused, right? I'm the owner. I'll take that. It's mine. And we hold these things that we have surrendered, supposedly, and we start gripping them and holding them tight and talking about how they're really ours. That's not what it talks about in this parable. We are ones who are leasing. Leasing. And so, the Sanhedrin, the religious experts, they kind of go off. They hear this parable, sensing that it's about them. This guy's good with words. We got to come up with something. And so they go back and they conspire. They need to trick him. So the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, they come up with lots of questions. The chapter 12 is now the rest of their questions. They are coming back to ask him. And they have an agenda. So they come back loaded with questions to trap him. That's their intention. Now keep in mind this idea of leasing and owning as we talk about the next subject. In verse 13, chapter 12. And they sent him, some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians, to trap him in his talk. Now, Pharisees were loyal to the law. They kept it, and they were the Jewish religious experts. The Herodians, they were Romans through and through, nationalistic. They defended the nation of Rome. And so these two are on the same page. That's hard to believe, right? They normally are at odds with one another, but they have found something in common, the hatred of this teacher, Jesus. So they're on the same team for this. So that's kind of odd, but here they come. Verse 14, they came and they said to him, because they want to trap him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God." Sarcastic. There's no real intention. Again, we've already seen their heart. Their heart is to trap him. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." And they brought one. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is on this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Jesus said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. Now, I'm not a coin collector, but long time ago, my grandmother, she gave me some coins. She's passed away, and I had just hung on to these coins. And they don't make coins this gigantic anymore. But this is a silver dollar from the 70s. Anyone know whose inscription is on there? Eisenhower. Oh, good. Yeah, this is Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so I was reading this story, thinking about this coin specifically. But anyway, so the religious experts come and they say, pay taxes or not pay taxes? What's the answer? And so you can see where this is going. If he says pay taxes, the Jewish clientele are not going to be happy with him. But if he says not to pay taxes, then the Romans are going to be upset. So they have got him in a trap right where they want him. And so they said, what's the answer? Should we pay taxes or not? Well, Jesus says, where's one of those coins that you pay the taxes with? I don't happen to have one. Let me see one. So someone puts him a denarius, and he says, whose face is on? Whose likeness is this right here? And they said, well, Caesar. And he said, well, render, give. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Pay your taxes. And then he follows it up with this. Render to God what is God's. And what he's saying is this. Look at your own life. Whose likeness are you made in? You have a face as well, much like a coin has a face. And it resembles someone. It resembles someone. Whose face does your face resemble? This takes them all the way back into Genesis, right? We are made in his likeness. We are made in his image. We are his. Leasing and owning. You are owned. You have an owner, and you bear his image. Pay your taxes. Be a good citizen. But realize there is one in control of it all. And those last 5 words, and they marveled at him because he was speaking a truth and a teaching that was profound. And the same is asked of us as well. You know, we come as people who have said we have surrendered it all, right? But how are we really living our lives? At times, we want to be owners. And he calls us each and every day to be people that realize that we are just leasing. And we, again, could talk about this conversation in the area of money and taxes and marriage and all of these things. And And yeah, especially in the area of money, it's a very sensitive issue. You know, how much money should I give to the church, right? That's a common question. It's the wrong approach. The real approach is he owns it all. He owns it all, and 10% is a great benchmark. But for many, maybe it's 20, 30, 25%. I don't know. Where's your heart when it comes to money and the ownership of God in your life? That's the real question. And so in chapter 12, we see all these different topics. You can go back and look at them. But it's in this realm of owning and leasing. And the very last story is an interesting one in chapter 12, where there is an elderly woman who comes in to give her offering in the temple. And there's lots of people giving lots of money, and it's clanging around, and it's making a scene. And she simply drops in 2 little coins. And Jesus says, wow, she has given everything. Everything. She has not given out of her wealth. She has given out of her poverty. She got it because she realized that he is the owner of it all. Where are we at this morning? Where are you at in living your life? See, the first question is, have you surrendered? Have you accepted the Son? Part 2 is, as someone who has, how are you living? As someone who is on lease or someone who's still trying to be an owner? Stop being an owner. Think about what God has entrusted into you, your time and your wealth, your possessions, your relationships, and how you can use those for his kingdom. He's the owner. How are we using the stuff that he gives us to build into eternity? Too many times we're building something of our own little kingdom, our own vineyard. But the owner wants us to ask bigger questions about how are we building into his kingdom, his vineyard, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I don't know about you, but that is a steep challenge for every single one of us to assess where are we at. You see, I have just scratched the tip of the iceberg here. Really, there's lots more conversation to be had, whether it's in your family or in a life group, to really unpack, are we really living? Are we really living? Are we fooling each other? Are we really living as people who are on lease with the things that God has given us? He is the owner of it all. Let me pray for us. Dear God, we come before you, and these are not easy things to wrestle with. Difficult, because at times we are so drawn to being the owner, and we want to be in control, and handing things over to you is hard and difficult. And so, Lord, I pray for those things that the people in this room are thinking about right now, the things that they are maybe needing to take less grip off of. And whether it's money or relationships or time, I pray that you would, by your Spirit, speak to them about how you are wanting them to use those things that you have entrusted into their care for your kingdom. And Lord, I pray for those in this room who 20 minutes ago we talked about having a relationship with your Son who don't know what that means. I pray that you would impress upon them accepting the Son that you patiently have given to a world that keeps rejecting. May we be open, and may your Spirit impress that on our hearts today. We say it a lot, but it's true. You are good to us. We give you thanks as the owner. We pray this in your name. Amen.